Yeah, so it's sticking with the straight and narrow from a natural hygiene point of view, or these days the term natural hygiene tends to be ambiguous, so I tend to use the term preventive medicine or lifestyle medicine, which includes being vegan. But I was saying to someone before, I don't describe myself as vegan to the uninitiated because it tends to be misinterpreted. So I just say preventive medicine. I avoid saturated fat and trans fat. So that's effectively vegan. And if they can't work it out, well, it's their problem. But I avoid the V words in describing my own philosophy. So sticking with the straight and narrow, particularly from the dietary point of view, can be quite a problem, particularly for people coming from a standard diet or from a vegan perspective who are not particular about the health side of it. In other words, what Alec Burton used to call tea and biscuits vegetarians or junk food vegans. Changing from that kind of a diet to what I call the straight and narrow, which would be fruit and vegetables separated by a decent amount of time between meals. Shelton suggested 4 to 5 hours between meals, and he recommended effectively no breakfast. If you're going to have 5 hours between meals, it's really difficult to include breakfast. Not that breakfast is really necessary anyway. So to change from the conventional to the health promoting, the bad news is for most people, without professional help or without strong support, they're not going to do it. And the reason is the addiction. The additives, salt, oil, sugar, and the other additives in food, which is deliberately placed there, which sounds conspiratorial, but in fact it's a bit like the tobacco or the alcohol industry. These things are placed there in order to get people coming back. So it's a genuine addiction that people need help to correct, and that requires preferably professional help. I've been fortunate in having known Alec Burton and having gone to his place in Sydney. For those who don't know of Alec Burton, he was an osteopath in New South Wales, specialising in fasting supervision and dietary correction. A real pioneer. And since the 80s, I've since attending some of his workshops and also being a guest at his place for supervised fasting. One of his understudies, by the name of Goldhammer, Alan Goldhammer, has since started his own place in California, Northern California, Santa Rosa, Northern California. And that's a far more extensive place for supervised fasting and correction of lifestyle. And he's a brilliant guy, and I've been fortunate enough to also go there and been very impressed with his place. I've been 8 times to his place, each time for a supervised fast, mostly 2 weeks, and on one occasion 22 days. So so I've got to say, for those who don't know me, I'm not a health professional. I've simply gleaned that what I know from the professionals that I've been in touch with over the years. So I've been fortunate in that regard. So, as I say, without professional help or without strong support, people are not going to change. With the best will in the world, they will not change unless they have an iron will, self-discipline that most people, they'll go maybe a week or 2 weeks and then they'll fall off the wagon. Now, what they determined at the True North Health Centre in California was that it needed 6 weeks generally for people to adapt to a healthful diet. In other words, to overcome their addictions. They often recommend fasting initially to stay with the diet that they provide at True North. Does effectively the same thing, just takes longer. It's just that fasting speeds up the adaptation process of the body. So that would be the recommendation for anyone wanting to make the change, to go to, well, obviously we cannot go to America. We're not likely to go there for a while. But I was saying to Maureen, and there's another chap who understudied with Alec Burton by the name of Doug Evans. He's in New South Wales, and he has a small health centre. And I have met Doug Evans, and I was quite impressed with him. And I do intend to go there at some point, possibly later this year. So that's the best way, and possibly the only way, to make a thorough transition to a health-promoting diet. The other things the other tips that may help are, because the systems of the body are complement each other, the circulatory system and the digestive system and the nervous system, etc. The one complements the other, so that if you have other habits of living in order, you're taking the right amount of sleep, sun exposure, rest, meals separated by a decent length of time between, and all of the other health factors, that it's been found that this helps enormously in making a transition. You seem to be less addicted, or the addiction seems to be less severe when the other systems of the body are in sync. So that if someone, for instance, tries to switch to a health-promoting diet and ignores the other factors, I think they'd find it virtually impossible, because you're working against the system. So now another tip, I guess you could call it, that Dr. John McDougall suggests is predominating starch foods, because they're satisfying. They fill you, and they feel satisfying. Dr. Joel Furman seems to be at odds with that to some degree, in that he recommends lots of greens with the basis, on the basis that if you're having super nutrition, that you'll be less likely to fall off the wagon. So my take on that is that I think it's a combination of the two. So let's, I guess their tips. Dr. Michael Greger, he has other tips that in the early days he tended to transition people through vegan junk food, which Bruce and myself and others were critical of. He seems to have come around a little bit these days into a more pure approach. So I think another factor that occurs to me is the fear factor. The main fear as people age is the fear of incapacity and the various chronic problems. And there's only one, I think there's really only one solution to that, and that's right living, as Sheldon used to describe it. So the fear factor may also be a prompt in order to make changes. So yeah, because people tend to be selfish and think about the way that they hate to be a burden to others and to be incapacitated as they get older. That's a great motivator also. So I think I've covered all of the elements that I can think of. So to keep things fairly concise, I could maybe open this to questions. Just on that.
You were saying that it takes about 6 weeks for the transition to occur, and that fasting, you believe, accelerates that process.
Yes.
And so therefore, does that mean to say that the period could be less than 6 weeks, or it could be as little as 6 weeks with the fasting? And that was one question. The second one would be, do you go sort of cold turkey and start the fasting immediately before you start to then transition on to healthier foods, or do you do a bit of healthy foods, then the fast, and then more healthy foods? How do you approach that?
Yes. Well, what they recommend at True North is to be on fibrous foods prior to the fast for at least a week. In other words, fruits and vegetables prior to the fast. That's the second question. What the first question was, the 6 weeks. It does vary with people, but I think that's about the average. The work out, that's the average. They need to be there for 6 weeks in order not to fall off the wagon when they leave. So obviously people not everyone can stay there for 6 weeks for financial reasons and other reasons, but they recommend 6 weeks.
So 6 weeks would be either inclusive or exclusive of a fast. The fast just accelerates the process, but 6 weeks otherwise would be sufficient even if there were no fast within that 6 week period?
Even with a fast, they recommend 6 weeks.
Okay.
They do, yeah. And not everyone can fast. For the ones who are just on the excellent food there, apparently it's 6 weeks because it's regardless of the fast, because it's the taste buds and the microbiome that change in that time. So, and in any case, even if you fast, you're going to be eating if you fast, for instance, a week, you're going to be eating for the rest of the time anyway. Yeah. So you're going to be on food anyhow before you leave.
Yeah.
So yeah. So if that answers your question.
Well, just to get some attention over this side of the room. I'm not trying to. Just spreading around a bit. So yeah, just one thing that I slightly, and I'm like you, I think, I hate when people say that to me because I think I'm not like you, but I mean, in the regard that you mentioned, you said, you're not a professional as such like at Burton or Sheldon or someone. So I put myself similarly in that category. However, I have had some experience, as you have. So a bit like you in that regard. So I'm very interested in what you have to say. And I think about, because of my experience in reading, and like practical experience and reading theory, it leads me to make commentary on one of the things that you said that I don't quite agree with unless you add a bit more to it. And that is, you said something to the words to the effect of that a strict raw vegan diet would give you the same or similar results, but it'll take longer than a fast. And what I would say is that's not quite true, because a properly conducted fast, will actually take you to a higher level of health, whereas it might take you all of the rest of your life and still never get to the healthier point that you were seeking. But a fast sort of changes gear, if you like, and certain things happen on a fast which otherwise will not happen on the best raw diet.
Sure.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
Yeah.
Particularly with chronic disease.
That's right. Yeah.
You're not. Yeah, it really does get to a deeper level.
That's right.
Seems.
Yeah.
Particularly after 2 weeks, seemingly, for some reason. After, fasting for 2 weeks, it becomes the fast gets to a cellular level, which is one of the reasons I went a couple of times. I've gone 3 weeks. But 2 weeks has usually suited me nicely, but a couple of times I've gone 3 weeks for that reason, that to sort of clean out the cellular side of things, however they put it scientifically. But they do describe it quite well. So I see what you mean. I do see what you mean.
Yeah, it's just a little point that if not maybe so much people here, I'm not sure, but new people to the idea of it might think, as I would have a long time ago, oh yeah, well if you can't fast, all you've got to do is eat raw food and that'll kind of cure you. Well, in my opinion, it won't, especially for chronic disease.
Sure, No, I'd agree with that. I'd agree. Yeah.
In fact, Burton once said, related about a lady that he had come to him who had very bad, I think it's called, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, spondylosing, something like that, arthritis.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, and he said she had to keep coming back and do a 30-day fast each year for 10 years. And eventually she got, and in between, a very strict regime. You see, now very few people are going to stick at something like that for such a long time. And gradually her body kind of rebuilt itself. And I don't know, I never met, but he gave the idea that she had, far superior health than she ever would have if she hadn't done that.
Oh, I can believe that.
Yeah.
I came up with a name for it. Can we call it the gut reset?
The gut reset.
The joke? Yeah, it's like the Great Reset, except the gut reset.
Maybe, but the whole body kind of resets. So fair enough.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, Alan Lehrer, in his book, he talks about it as intercollated fasting. And he wasn't into, even though he had a lot of long fasts, he was more into having relatively short fasts, and then he called it intercalated. So then after your short fast, I don't know, 5 days or a week or something, then you go on your raw food, which would be mainly cherries or grapes or something like this time of year, and then you have another fast of 5 or so days, 10 days maybe, but not really long fast, because he was under the opinion, but he may not have been right, that people wouldn't do well as if they did this other regime. And that's something I haven't tried, but I would like to try throughout a whole year or more, just keep it going. And the reason I think that's a good idea is because I believe in time, millennia ago, that food wouldn't have been as available as it is now. And you'd have to kind of walk quite a bit, searching, walking, looking, find your little patch of fruit trees or whatever, eat them, then that would be all gone, then you'd have to go again for another few days. So I think our bodies are well suited to that type of regime. And I think, from my opinion, that's probably the closest to the optimum way of getting health back or retaining it. And I don't know of anyone that does do that. There might be.
That's right.
Insofar as we're adapted to, maybe it's slightly different than that. I expect that it's more seasonal. So if you're encountering a tree and it's laden with fruit, there's probably another one nearby and another one nearby. So what will probably happen is that you would spend the season there because you might not be inclined to risk heading off in some direction, not knowing if there's something far afield if you had discovered that. But what would probably cause you to move is that fruit season, which lasts a month or 2 months, is now over, and that would cause you then to move on.
True, I agree.
And that time in between would be the fasting. So maybe not fasting every few days, it might be fasting every month or two between each season as you move.
Yeah, I agree with that. The way it would have probably been more like that, but I'm saying to apply it in a modern sense.
But it's
you
much
could
more
probably do the way I'm describing it. Plus, it's a bit like training or something, athletic training. If you give yourself that goal, and as long as it doesn't affect your work, I mean, it might be 3 or 4 days, because usually most people, once they get the hang of it, can fast for a few days. And it'd be very interesting to try, and then to go into, fruits like cherries or grapes or something, or watermelon, and maybe some celery or something, and then back on fasting, and then just do those over even a few months if you could. And I'd give someone a gold medal if they could do that, and I'd love to know how they do.
I used to do it. I haven't been doing it regularly, but I do 3 days every month.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Oh, it's not. I thought you were talking about doing it regularly.
Yeah, I am.
Well, that's regularly, 3 days every month.
No, for 4 or 5 days, let's say that a few days to a week, you are having raw, mainly fruit. And then you have a similar amount of time on fasting, water. And then you have a similar amount of time on fruit. And so you just keep changing it around. And that's what Arnold Eric was talking about.
So you're talking about doing it 3 times a month, 4 times a month?
Yeah, whatever it is, you just keep rolling it on.
Okay.
And eventually your body does adapt to it. And as I said, in the past, I believe we would have had to do that, maybe seasonally or whatever. But just every now and then, there wouldn't be any food. So you have to look, and that's why your senses get better too, like animals do. Their ears move there, and their eyes, everything like that. Where's the food? Where's the food?
Yeah, I found that because I did a juice fast for 4 months, a decade ago probably now, and I did find that my perception of colours deepened.
Yeah.
I was happier, felt just more calm and relaxed and content. My eyesight generally got sharper.
But again, I'm not talking about juicing.
I know, I'm just saying.
I'm talking about food and fasting.
No, I get that. I'm just
food
simply saying that
food and fasting.
To the extent that it is applicable, you're talking about your senses improving. I found that on that experience that I had, which was, it's a lighter way of consuming food anyway.
And Philip, how many long fasts would you have undertaken yourself, and do you short fast regularly? And if so, how often do you do short fasts at home? Or
I guess it depends how you define a fast. I often have one meal. Often, if I'm busy or preoccupied, I'll have just the one meal in a day, which means 24 hours between. I wouldn't call that fast, because the food is still in the system. But beyond that, I might do a few days once in a while. The longer fasts have all been supervised, at either True North or with Alec Burton. And they would be, you say how many? Over the years, I don't know, scores, I suppose.
Yeah.
Scores. Yeah, I haven't counted them, but over the years, since the 80s, probably every year or every other year since then. And as I say, I felt most comfortable with 2 weeks, a 2-week fast, complete fast. There's water, and I found that the most satisfactory for me. But the most advanced place for fasting, as I say, is the True North Centre. The doctors there have actually submitted their research to the medical journals, and they have been published, which is significant. And obviously, if standard medicine were to adopt that modality, not that they will, mind you. I was going to say, if they were to adopt fasting, then they'd be head and shoulders above the pharmaceutical approach, for sure. But they won't do it. They won't do it. They'll be piloted by their colleagues. so they won't do it. In spite of, even if they know that it works, they won't do it. But as I say, all of this, the research from True North is quite phenomenal, and they have their own laboratory there now for testing bloods and so on. So they've got the scientific information on those things. We can only go from our own experience, but they've actually put it in scientific papers. So, you know, it's commendable, I think. I was very impressed there, very impressed. And they're not kind of they're not what I would call mumbo jumbo alternative medicine. It's mainstream, and yet and though it's mainstream, they're still vegan, and they're still on the natural hygiene page. I know the doctors often would say, if they discovered that eating dairy, for instance, or eating eggs or fish was in any way beneficial, they would do that. They would recommend it. But that's not what the research says. The research says entirely vegetables and fruit. And so the results speak for themselves. Yeah.
The ladies got any questions? Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
When you say you eat one meal a day, what do you eat?
Vegetables. Steamed and raw.
Steamed and raw. Okay.
Yes. Some starch.
What sort of veggies are your
Sweet
favourites?
potatoes, corn, beans, lettuce, salad veggies. And not too many. I mean, I keep it fairly simple. You know, some steam. Silver beet, I like silver beet because it's kind of sweet. Yeah, so I keep it fairly simple.
And how old are you now, and what impact do you think fasting has had overall on your health and longevity?
I'm 71. I may not be around it had I not discovered hygiene. Who knows, you know, but my blood work from the last time I went to True North, my blood work was excellent. And people do tend to say, well, you must be very disciplined, but it's not the case, because once you have made that transition, it's really just habit. So I can't take credit for that. It's like the credit should be to the people who have passed on that information to me, really. And once you're in a habit, if you taste something that's got salt or sugar in it, you notice it straight away and you avoid it, and it doesn't taste right. There's something about it that doesn't taste right. So it becomes easier, you know. Yeah, and I think I've benefited. As I say, my blood work, it was fine. You know.
So you don't eat rice, you don't eat grains, or
Oh yeah.
You do?
I eat rice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Alec Burton used to say was, don't become. He said, it's almost a contradiction, but he said, don't become neurotic about it. Just get on with your life. Just do it, and then get on with your life.
Well, you just said fruit and veggies, you know.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing if you
exactly.
because people, whenever anyone does talk about health, everyone always thinks, oh, what do you do? You know, what does a person do who, you know, has fasted or eats a healthy diet?
Yes.
You know,
What do they do? You mean?
Food-wise, what do they eat?
Oh, I know.
And that's what you're asking in a sense,
The
aren't
great
you?
variety
Which
of
I get
fruits.
asked all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, me too. Because if someone says,
when
I eat
asked
fruit
you,
and
you
veggies,
said fruit,
yeah,
mainly steamed veggies and
Yeah.
a bit of raw.
And that's exactly what I would say if you asked me.
You know, like
But then if you
rice
said
and
later,
flour and
I
Do you
think
eat
it's very
rice?
much like
No,
what
I
I
agree.
do,
I'm
which
on your
is
side. You're right.
through the summer, I typically tend more heavily towards raw food than I do in the winter.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way it's fallen out.
Yes.
And so, and even then, it's only every now and again I'll have some sweet potato or I'll have some rice. You know, maybe I'll have it And sometimes I might go weeks without having that rice in winter. But I don't typically have it in the summer. Typically in the summer I'll emphasise more fruits than I do in the winter.
Sure.
So I just I've just fallen into that habit. I have gone through winters with no cooked food, but you know.
Well, I think, like Alec Burton was, again, I keep quoting him, but he said that he wouldn't be worried about these variations, particularly in his patients. The people he'd be worried about are the people who are on the standard diet, because it's the most dangerous diet on earth, and it's going to kill you. And they're the people he would be worried about. And this is, I think, why he used to say, don't be neurotic about it, just get on with it, and just do the best you can and get on with your life. You know, your stamp collecting or whatever it happens to be, and attend to the other factors, you know, the sleep and the rest and the exercise, social factors. That you're either poised or poisoned. Don't worry about things. And so he always emphasised that, and he wasn't particularly worried about his patients who slightly fell off the wagon, shall we say. He said they'll find out that they'll determine that they'll suffer as a consequence, and they'll change as a result anyway, just through their own experience. So he was fairly easygoing in that way. Goldhammer is very, very strict, on the other hand. He would have to be the poster boy for natural hygiene, in a sense. He comes in to the meal room with everyone else and has his food, and then gets on with his work. And there's no falling off the wagon for him. Because he knows the facts and figures. He knows what's going to happen. He's done the research. You know. So.
And when you say that, qualified though, what does he have, say, compared to you? Does he have steamed veggies and rice and so on?
Predominantly, he has salad.
Right.
Supplemented with steamed starches and greens.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what they serve at True North.
And when you started with vegetarian veganism in South Africa, did you start off with a fast through Dr. Lawrence?
I did.
Was it? Yeah.
I did.
And how was that? Could you describe that experience?
Yeah, it started me on the right track. It's sad when your parent, I was only a teenager, it's sad when your parents are not supportive. They were worried I was starving, so it wasn't as pleasant as it could have been. But I followed the instructions of Dr. Lawrence, whom I'd seen, and since that was really the beginning of natural hygiene. In those days, it was called straight nature cure, which was effectively the same as natural, with a few variations. It was effectively the same as natural hygiene, straight nature cure. And he was a naturopath in Cape Town. Yeah.
Is that where you're from originally, is it?
No, I lived there three years.
Oh, where are you from? England?
From the UK.
Yeah, I thought so. From your accent, I was trying to pick it. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
I got on very well with Alec Burton because he's in the same. He's from the same neck of the woods, so we hit it off quite well.
And were you aware of him before you came to Australia?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Oddly, I stayed at a vegetarian hostel in London over the Christmas of '69. And an Australian guy, whom I met there, he was talking about Dr. Shelton, whom I hadn't heard of before. and he recommended his books. And then he talked about Alec Burton in Sydney. And he said, and I had already organised emigration at that point. And he said, when you get to Sydney, you've got to look up Alec Burton, which I did. And since then, I collected a lot of Shelton's audio tapes and books. Got all of his books available, all of his audio tapes, and listened to them intently. And then around that time, I met Bruce, of course, and shortly after that, I met Alec Burton around the same time.
What year was that?
71.
Oh. Mm.
71. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I was 70. Late 70, 71.
Mm.
So I've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate that way. But the credit goes to the teachers rather than the person who benefited, namely myself in this case. I give all the credit to the doctors who were pioneers. A lot of them have passed on, Shelton and Burton more recently. Yeah.
Mm.
So there we are.
Are you prepared to hazard a guess as to why it is my experience, which you made reference to before, around I can't remember exactly the words you used, but you talked about falling off the wagon. Like the extent to which I've fallen off being more or less raw, which hasn't been terrible, like I haven't gone completely off the rails, but sometimes I'll eat less raw and I notice it and I rectify that.
Oh,
You know,
okay,
so
yes.
my body, I'm listening to it, I hear it, and I
Yes.
alter my behaviour. So why is it, do you think that, well, I've got two questions actually. Do you think that those people who have maybe done fasts or done some length of time and they've gotten themselves reset into a different way of eating, that I'm just wondering what determines as to whether somebody can maintain it, because you're suggesting some people can't, so they can't initially get on the wagon. That's one problem. But then there's also the problem of getting off the wagon. What is it that, in your estimation, apart from maybe some of the support mechanisms, what is it about somebody who either can't get on the wagon, or more particularly to this question, why they fall off the wagon and don't notice the consequences of doing so? Because I certainly do, and that to me is the feedback which causes me then to jump back on again, because I go, oh, I don't like the way this feels, I'm going to stop doing this, and I'll go back to what I know actually works for my health.
Yeah. Well, I'd refer that problem to Joel Furman, Dr. Joel Furman, and he answers questions on raw versus some cooked, for instance. And he says in one of his talks, he said you cannot go, don't go all raw. You just don't go all raw, because you'll spend all day chewing. He said don't do that. He said you'll not stay. You will fall off the wagon if you try that. And similarly, Burton used to say he'd be asked questions by fruitarians, and he'd say, look, you've got to have some greens. You've got to have some greens. You're gonna fall down.
That was my experience. Just quickly, because for a year I did basically fruitarian. I was like, that's pretty much all I ate was fruit. I had a little bit of cooked here and there, but I didn't eat greens. By the end of that year, I was just hanging for greens.
Yeah.
I just could not get enough of greens by the end of that, and that really showed me that it's unbalanced not to have the greens.
Body kind of tells you.
Yeah.
You've got to have your kale. Yeah.
Yes.
God.
So I'd refer. Yeah, but Furman makes a good point. Yeah.
So, any comment on Manchester? It seemed to be a bit of a sort of centre of vegetarianism. The vegetarian societies there to this day. I think Burton's from the Manchester area, and you're at the University of Manchester at one stage. And the first vegetarians in North America were from Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, as they say, Manchester, a lot to answer for. Any commentary about the Manchester connection, or you think it would have happened anyway? It was more about South Africa for you, the conversion to vegetarian.
Speculation. I know Alec Burton was Bradford, which is, I suppose, 30 miles from Manchester. But it's one of the big centres in the north of England. Speculation, really. I wouldn't like to speculate. You mean what's the question?
Oh, for example, you were at the University of Manchester for a while. Did you graduate from there? Or no. What did you find was wrong with it, or?
I was doing chiropody, which is now called podiatry, and I was keen with natural hygiene then, and I asked one of I remember the turning point that caused me to leave. One of the lecturers was talking about bunions and corns, and they were saying, we recommend we can cut the bunions and corns away surgically. And I said, well, what about removing the cause of these things? And she said, we'd be out of business if we removed the cause. And that seems to be the case across the spectrum of medical. And so I was disappointed. So I left.
So bunions and corns are curable with diet. That's something that doesn't really come up much on YouTube, but that's the case.
Not an expert on feet.
From shoes and things that cause
Comfortable
corns
shoes,
and calluses on
high
your feet.
heels and
Sorry?
high heels are a problem.
Yeah, exactly. I hate them.
Yes.
Horrible things.
Yes. Yes.
Bare feet are better.
That put me off.
But bunions are the foot's deformed.
Oh yes.
Can't see how it can be
Dietary. Well, I suppose some of these joints become inflamed or deformed through
which
meat
makes
diet.
it worse. So the inflammation is diet.
Yes.
I suppose there is a.
No, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on foot problems, but that's really what put me off. As far as that neck of the woods as being the origins of what happened in America, I really don't know.
So you met Percy Sarity, yeah?
I've not met him.
Not met him? No.
Read about him.
And well, while we've got you here, any comment on the other pillars of health, exercise and sleep, those types of things?
Just the standard, the standard advice. It's 7 to 8 hours of sleep. You're either poisoned, as I said. Shelton used to say, you're either poisoned or poisoned. So it's a matter of having a nice balance, trying to reach a balance of mental poise. Adequate sun exposure, very important, which seems to be neglected. And of course exercise. I think as a rule of thumb, I always say a half an hour twice a day out of breath. Get out of breath for a half an hour twice a day as a minimum. And that would actually, that's as far as aerobic exercise. And then the stretching and weight bearing as well. So all of those things complement the dietary approach. Yeah.
What do you do for exercise?
Cycle, run, walk. I go to yoga class. Yeah.
When it's on.
So they're back on again now. Yeah. So you do what you can. Yeah.
And do you think you will write a book? I think some people maybe I think Burton left his run a bit late on actually publishing books. I mean, there was a book there at the end, but he had a lot to say. Really, his lectures are his legacy. essentially.
Yeah, well, I actually, not being qualified, I'm not sure that. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd have the letters behind my name to make it work for a book. I'm just another Joe that's benefited, you know.
Mm.
So, but there's been some good biographies written on people who benefited. Sandberg, the Rio Grande, that's Shelton's biography.
Mm.
So,
You got any questions, Maureen?
No, I'm just happily listening to
digesting.
everybody.
Yeah.
Another question.
What kind of water do you recommend? Do you recommend spring water or reverse osmosis or distilled water? What would you?
Either a water filter.
Yeah.
We just filtered water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just,
It's interesting.
a lot of
You
people
know,
recommend the distilled water.
they're still fine.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You know the TV show QI with Stephen Fry. There was a segment on there where he said that they were talking about distilled water, and he said, "Don't drink distilled water because you'll damage your kidneys." And it was an error.
Yeah.
It was an error. Yeah.
So it doesn't damage the kidneys?
No. No.
A lot of people are having these alkaline filters, aren't they? Some
Yeah.
Cameron and filters.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't worry too much about the water. I mean, if you don't want to be drinking chlorine and stuff.
No.
But beyond that, just
We have a reverse osmosis that takes everything out.
yes.
Hopefully I'll do as much with my diet to get the minerals back in. Because
Yeah.
it does take everything out.
Right.
Mostly the bad stuff is taken all the good minerals out.
Yeah. You won't want to drink tap water.
No, no.
Anyone else you had another question, I think.
I did. I don't know what it
You've
is.
forgotten.
I got one on a slightly different bent. It's to do with natural hygiene and all of the things. It's a sort of a auxiliary topic, I suppose you'd call it. I think that'd be the right word. And that, and I've got my own very strong views on it based on my, I'll get to what it is in a second, based on my understanding, and that all came from Burton. And he actually gave me a book that, as far as I know, no one else has got a copy of, which he wrote. And it's so good because, I'll get to the topic in a second, but what it does, it explains about, well, the word is vaccination in unison, if you like, with health, and that's something that's missing from the vaccination debate. So yeah, what are your views on that, on vaccination?
Yeah, I'd agree with Burton. I did ask him about that. I said the way I put it to him was, I said, they do claim that vaccination works. I said, it seems to be, I mean, the science claims that vaccination works. And he said, well, yeah, it does. He said, it does. But he said, that's not the end of the story.
Mm. That's exactly how I would put it.
Yes.
From reading your stuff, it does work. I say that to
Yes.
people, it does work. But
Yes.
then you've got to say, what does work mean? And that's the critical thing.
Yes, it stops the specific disease, according to the way Burton explained it can, not always, but it can stop the specific disease.
Mm.
You're not really getting to the problem because the problem is innovation toxemia.
Yeah.
Killed 30 people with
So,
one hit.
yeah. So you're looking at the germ or the virus rather than the cause of the germ of the virus, the culture medium. So you talk about that. You'd say you're better not to provide a culture medium.
Mm.
Have a better environment.
Yes, it's fine for the.
So it'll be interesting to see, in the next, well, it seems like we all agree on that, unless there's any dissenters here.
Yes.
But, is there?
Yeah.
All right, but the other one is, of course, with Corona or COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. How it's going to be for people like me who, even though I can't afford it, occasionally like to travel overseas. How it's going to be when they say, "Oh, well, you can't go anywhere unless you've had your vaccination." Plus, in all other areas of life, like work, for example. Like my daughter, for example, is a dental nurse.
Yes.
And she's already discussed that with her boss. And he said, because he knows her views, and he said, don't worry, you know, we'll be all right, I'm on your side. That's how he's describing it. And I've met him, and he probably means that. But what if they make some sort of rules that in your practice, you can't have anyone there who's not vaccinated? What are you going to do then?
It's
My
illegal
daughter
to
would.
do that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe at the moment.
It is illegal to do
Yeah.
that.
It is, and it's probably not going to
Well,
change.
you
What they'll
lose
do
your
is
job,
they'll
though.
do the same thing that they did with the directives, and they'll make it appear as if you have to do it when you don't actually have to do it. And then you end up having to do a rearguard action where you have to defend your actions in light of the law that they haven't actually been enforcing. That's as simple as it gets. The onus becomes.
What do you think
As to what?
about this vaccination question, how it could affect people? It's hard to predict exactly, but
It is.
Could be a problem.
I mean, the way they're going in the UK in particular with mass vaccinations, I just say, well, good luck to it. You know, if it works, it works.
But as soon as they hit the real the wild virus,
Yeah.
they'll
They're not getting to
that.
the zoonotic problems, are they?
mm,
It's originating from zoonotic origin.
There's a lady called, she's a professor, Dolores Carhill, and she's from the World Freedom Alliance, and they're talking about an airline. She said she has travelled all over the world, she does not wear a mask, she does not social distance, she does not have any vaccines, she will not have a test. And she said she threatens them with legalities, and she knows all about the law and how, I mean, she can explain it a lot better than me, but she said we have freedom of speech, freedom of travel, and freedom of bodily integrity. And she said it's a sovereign law, and they cannot, it overrides everything else.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is totally illegal.
Well, in a sense, they're not. What they're doing is they're making an offer.
They suggest
They're saying that this is what you should be doing, and then they're couching it in legalistic terms to make it appear as if it's mandatory when it really isn't. And they're leaving it up to you to make that determination. Anyway, more questions. I do have a difference of opinion. If you want to ask me about that, then we can talk about that. But I have a question. I remember the question from before. Are there centres in Victoria or others in Australia which you can recommend for extended fasts? I've never done a supervised fast. I've done an unsupervised one for nearly 2 weeks, which was a little bit of juice at the start, but mostly water for I think it was 11, 12 days. But I'd be interested in doing a 2, 3, 4 week fast, but I wouldn't know where to go in Australia, apart from, you said there was another underling, Doug, was it?
Doug Evans.
Doug Evans in Sydney, was it?
Near Sydney.
Near Sydney, yeah. Is that the only one, or are there others?
There's also Greg Fitzgerald's another one.
Oh, yes, the Greg, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
where's he?
Oh, he's somewhere up there in north. I think he's in New South Wales as well.
I don't think he's got a facility though. That's
Yeah, he may not, but he'd be wanting to talk to him. And Doug as well, yeah. Yeah, I've also met Doug.
I wonder if we
Way
can
back.
bring somebody
Greg.
over to do that.
Greg Fitzgerald.
Find it out here and get
Yeah.
somebody to do
Yeah.
that.
He's sort of an associate member of the American Health Association, you know.
Yeah, he's our Australian rep or whatever.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
After you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did it die?
I don't
Yeah,
know
the
if
card
they're
got full.
fasting.
Oh.
No.
So you left
So
it
you think someone,
But they're sympathetic to it.
sure.
Who's that? I missed that. Who's sympathetic?
That's Malcolm and Jenny and Malcolm McKay. Malcolm is a medical doctor,
Oh.
and Jenny is a nutritionist.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're on the same page as us.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
They do week and day courses you can attend.
Right.
The
Where-
one with an Anglesey, I did it on an Anglesey.
Where are they based?
They live in Richmond.
Oh, right. I never heard of them.
Yeah, they have. They go. I think they go to the same place in Anglesey. I went to live with them.
No, I've never heard of them.
Yeah,
I've heard of most people, but
yeah.
Not
No,
them.
not good people. I don't think they're qualified in fasting, but maybe.
No, it's not. No, it's not qualified in fasting.
Is there a qualification?
Yeah, you can get certification in fasting supervision.
Okay.
Whilst they're keen, I understand they haven't been like plant-based very long in comparison to a lot of the other doctors.
No.
And in a sense, they've got to sort of generate their own oeuvre of what their specialty is. And if you go to their or take part in their workshops, etc., it's often material from other doctors that they're using.
Yes.
They haven't necessarily got their own, what they specialise in. Obviously, retreats with
Yeah.
clean food the way, in the Australian context. But they haven't necessarily got their own sort of clinical research papers
Yes.
and that sort of thing going yet, or their own fancy diet name like Nutritarian or something like that. Yeah.
I would agree. Lovely big people. Right?
But yeah, it's a start, and it's better than they're better than a lot of the other plant-based doctors we have in Australia, some of whom are obese. Even Dr. Anthony Hadge down in Frankston. What? Yeah. I mean, it's gone to Google now already.
Obviously, he doesn't practice nutrition.
No.
There's lots of people that do that.
Yeah, probably. Well, and speaking of which, what did you think of a very nice lady, of course, but what do you think of Alec Burton?
Oh, that's a controversial figure.
Yeah.
I got on all right with her. But
Yeah, I've got on all right with her.
I got on all right with her. She tends not to get on well with other women, I found, when I was at the centre.
Yeah.
Yeah, she can be abrasive.
Yeah. And what do you think about her? I shouldn't ask. Like her body morph. If I can put it that way.
Well,
Like, does she look like me? Lean
no.
and fit?
Very few do, Marcus.
No. But even way back in
Apart from
1998, like, and I shouldn't be, it's pretty critical, I know, but anyway, you can all stone me to death if you want. But if anyone doesn't like it. But no, she just struck me as not a very good, she was a very nice person and very smart.
Yes.
Very smart. She can speak about 8 languages or something, and she's got that many degrees. But I just thought, whenever I saw her in person or in pictures of her in the Natural Hygiene magazine, I thought I wanted her to look better than that. I thought, because if you're going to go away and say, well, look at this, read this, this is great. And they see, Alec Burton, and she just looked too fat. That's my opinion. Did you feel that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There was a contradiction there somehow.
Yeah, and the women, when I was there, speaking of women, you made me think, what did they say? I remember the women, because it's mainly women who tended to go and fast there. Did you find that?
Yes.
Yeah, a bit of a predominance.
They kind of tuned in the wrong way to her.
Yeah, and they sort of gossip about her a little bit. They say things like, what do you think of Angela?
Yeah.
I never commented, but I can see what they're getting at.
She likes a bit of cake.
I think she does, too much pasta or something.
Well, I asked the same question to Goldhammer.
Right.
Burton. I said, how did you get on? Because he interned under Burton, you see. I said, how did you get on with Angela? And he said, oh, well, I helped her with a lot of studies. So I think we got on a bit better with her because she approved of me because he was a big help, when she was studying.
Like in an intellectual way, sort of thing. Yeah.
So she got on quite well with him.
Yeah.
But I think he picked up on she could be sort of disruptive in some way.
How is she going now? Do you know? I don't hear of her at all.
I don't know. I don't know. And apparently the centre's closed since his death. Yeah. So I don't know what she's doing.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a pity about that.
So there's not that many in Australia then.
No.
They were saying there was a fairly, what would you All
I think John Fielder is still active.
Yeah, he is.
In,
Okay.
yeah, and
That's
you know,
Queensland.
it's pretty good. In a month or two, the weather will be perfect if you wanted
Yeah.
to do that. Yeah.
And then there's one in Sydney, which was with
Direct Fitzgerald and Doug Evans.
Doug Evans. Yeah. And then there's this one, which is not really a centre, is it? The one you were telling me about. There was a couple in Melbourne who were doing fasts. Is that
Oh,
right?
no, they don't not doing fast. This is
Jenny Cameron.
Malcolm McCain,
Malcolm McCain.
Jenny Cameron.
Oh, and what did they do? I'm still missing.
They basically just talk for the week on the benefits of food.
And
But it's,
So I'm just thinking that maybe
If-
we need one.
if
We
you-
need one
yeah,
here in
if you're
Victoria.
interested, we
Oh,
could
yes.
organise a group fast through the Raw Food Group. We did one over New Year's a year ago.
Yep.
And, you know, people could go potentially longer than the 7 days, you know, could do 10 days
Mhm.
that way in a group setting if we had the right property. And
yes.
I'm not sure Monica may be selling her place, but I don't know what's
Yeah.
happened there, but yeah.
Yes.
Maybe we could
Yeah.
go off with a bang.
Yeah.
There's also, just resource-wise, I'm not sort of recommending it, but you can have a look at it. There's on a website, it's called the Fasting Support Group or something, and it's got a big water drop as its
Okay.
symbol. You'll find it. I can't remember the name of it, and some of the people there are very smart and really seem to know what they're on about, because I used to chat with them, and others are hopeless. You know, they're worse, they're injurious. They talk about having bone broth and how many vitamins you have while you're fasting and all sorts of really weird stuff, which shows you though that that's why that over the years, over the last say 50 or 100 years, people eventually tried all that sort of stuff, and then they wind up at somewhere like Shelton in San Antonio, Texas, or later times True North, or somewhere in Australia, Burton's, and they'd have to say, yes, forget all that rubbish, you know, and then stick to the straight and narrow, as your lecture's called. So about fasting, and you don't need all those extra things. But people out there, and I was the same myself when I started off looking at health. Because you're only young when you start off and you think, oh, vitamins, I need vitamins and I need this and homeopathy, you know, and you just don't know. And then, but if you read enough, eventually, if you've got some brains about you, you'll eventually be steered in what I think is pretty much the right direction.
I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah.
I'll have to be off.